guys, I am back with some more of Found by Margaret Peterson Haddix. Last time we read, Jonah and Chip got this super creepy, mysterious letter from a person who said if they called, they would deny ever having talked to them, and they needed to meet at this specific place at this specific time. So I'm really interested to see who this letter came from and if the boys are actually going to go meet this person. So we're going to pick back up with chapter 17. Angela DuPre, Katherine said. What? Jonah stammered. That's who this is from, Katherine said confidently, waving the letter in Jonah's face. Remember? Chip, she was the only one from the witness list who seemed kind of, regretful about hanging up on us. Is regretful a word? Jonah didn't care about words right now. Well, it could have been, what was that other woman's name? Monique Waters? Chip suggested. Oh no, Katherine said. That woman loved hanging up on us. She was cold. And the air traffic controller talked to you, not me, so he wouldn't send me a letter. And this is definitely a woman's handwriting. Definitely, Katherine said. Jonah was getting annoyed with their little junior detective routine. So, are you going? He asked. On Saturday? Chip and Katherine both stopped talking. Both of them froze with their mouths hanging open. It wasn't a good look for either of them. Then, Katherine laughed. Of course, she said. We have to. This is a complete stranger, Jonah said. She won't even sign her name. She won't talk to you on the telephone. She sounds crazy. This is how people end up getting kidnapped. But she's got information, Chip said. She might know who I am. Chip sounded so plaintive, Jonah couldn't argue anymore. If you're going to kidnap someone, you wouldn't ask to meet at the library, Katherine said. That conference room B, that's where we used to have brownie meetings when I was a little kid. It's like glass on 3 sides, and you have to walk through the whole library to get to it. It's safe. Jonah shrugged. He felt strangely dizzy, just like he had that time in Florida when he'd gotten caught in a riptide, and the flimsy little flutter kick he'd learned at the Liston pool had been no match for the forces carrying him out to sea. Jonah's dad had jumped in and saved him that time. He can't save me now, Jonah thought despairingly. We can't tell Mom and Dad anything about this. Can't tell them we're meeting a stranger. Can't tell them we've been calling strangers. Can't tell them we took pictures of a secret file. Besides, Katherine was saying, there will be 3 of us together, and no one adult could kidnap 3 kids. How could you be so sure she won't bring anybody with her? Jonah asked. At the same time, Chip said, what if seeing all 3 of us scares her off? She sounds a little paranoid. I think it has to be just me. Well, we're all going, Katherine said. There's no question about that. They didn't even get a chance to call any of the kids on the survivors list that afternoon, or the next, because they were so busy debating their strategy for meeting with Angela DuPre, if that was really who had written the letter. Saturday morning, Jonah had a soccer game and Katherine had a piano lesson, but by 2 o'clock they were both in Chip's driveway on their bikes, waiting. Jonah focused on balancing carefully, lifting his toes from the concrete on first the left side, then the right. He could straddle the bike for seconds at a time without touching the ground. As long as he concentrated on that little game, he didn't have to think about the fact he and Katherine and Chip were about to do something so incredibly stupid and probably dangerous as well. You didn't really leave a note, did you? Katherine asked, breaking Jonah's concentration and forcing him to slam his right foot down to the ground to keep from falling. I did, Jonah said. Katherine rolled her eyes. The note was Jonah's attempt at caution. They'd told Mom and Dad only that they were riding their bikes to the library, but in the desk drawer, Jonah had left a detailed note. A letter, really, explaining they were meeting a woman named Angela DuPre, or possibly Monique Waters, and if for some reason they didn't come back, someone should track her down. All the information about possible kidnappers would be on Chip Winston's computer. Katherine and Chip thought he was crazy for being so careful. Katherine sighed, blowing the air out in a way that ruffled the hair on her forehead. Wish Mom could have driven us, she said. Nobody rides bikes anymore. I do, Jonah said. Girls, I mean, Katherine said. All my friends think bikes are babyish. No one had better see me. She looked around anxiously. The street was deserted. Riding bikes versus being driven had caused a huge debate. Chip thought if they had a parent drive them, they'd have to explain why they had to be at the library exactly at 3 o'clock, rather than after their moms got through at the grocery store or before their dad started watching the football game. And Jonah thought that if they had to make a quick getaway, it would be ridiculous to stand there in the library lobby calling a parent. Yeah, I'm ready to be picked up. Do you mind not waiting until halftime? There's kind of a murderous psychopath chasing me. What do you really think is going to happen? Katherine asked. Jonah shrugged. She'd been asking him that question for 2 days, and he'd never been able to explain that exactly, even to himself. He didn't truly believe they were about to face a murderous psychopath. He just had a horrible feeling in the pit of his stomach that wouldn't go away. The garage door of Chip's house began rising, revealing Chip and his bike. Chip was grinning. "Time for some answers," he proclaimed. Jonah thought maybe Chip was going to sound like Donkey from Shrek, carefree, glib, and full of wisecracks, even in the face of danger. But it wasn't a very good imitation, because his voice cracked. "First, we've got to ride all the way over there," Katherine complained. "What is it, 2 miles? 3? "We don't have to go," Jonah said. "Of course we do," Chip said, pushing off and sailing out into the street. Jonah let Katherine follow Chip, and then he sighed and brought up the rear. It was weird how responsible he felt for the other two. Plaintive, pitiful, confused Chip, naive, gung-ho, enthusiastic Katherine. He and Chip were both equally tall and gangly. It wasn't like Jonah had any extra muscles for fighting off attackers. "There's strength in numbers," he told himself, pedaling hard to catch up. They passed the BP station where the high school band boosters were having a car wash fundraiser, the grocery store where Mom was right now buying peanut butter and milk and bread like it was any Saturday afternoon, the neighborhood that, according to a quick Google search they'd done, contained the Robin's Egg Lane where Danielle and McCarthy's family would soon be moving. They got to the library by 2:30. Chip was looking at his watch before he even slipped off his bike. "I've still got to wait another half hour," he said. "I thought the ride would take longer than that." "This will give us a chance to case the joint," Katherine said. Jonah knew she'd gotten that line from a movie. "And enough time to man our stations." Deciding how many of them should be in the conference room B at 3 o'clock had sparked their longest and bitterest debate. They'd eventually reached a compromise. Chip would be the only one actually in the conference room, but he'd secretly have his cell phone set on speakerphone in his lap, and he'd call Katherine, who'd be hiding out in the magazine section. She'd hold the cell phone up to both her ear and a walkie-talkie, broadcasting to the other walkie-talkie in Jonah's hand. Jonah would be in the nonfiction section near the conference room. He'd be pretending to read, facing away from the conference room, but he'd secretly have a mirror hidden in his book, directed over his shoulder so he could see what was happening to Chip every single minute. The walkie-talkie phone combo would let him hear everything that was going on in the conference room, so with the first hint of danger, he'd be able to storm in and save Chip. They had planned everything. None of them, even once, had said, "This is ridiculous. Walkie-talkies, mirrors hidden in books. We'll look like fools." Jonah thought maybe that was proof that, underneath it all, the other two were every bit as scared as he was. They leaned their bikes against the bike rack and tiptoed into the library. They peeked into the conference room B. No one was there, and tested out the cell phone walkie-talkie setup. "Spy 1 to Spy 2, Katherine said, giggling into the walkie-talkie. "Over." Jonah switched the walkie-talkie function to send. "Katherine, it works, but so help me, you've got to remember, you're not supposed to do any of the talking." At 2:55, Jonah flipped the hood of his sweatshirt up so it covered the walkie-talkie pressed against his ear. He pulled a book off a nonfiction shelf at random. It was something about tax codes. He positioned Katherine's makeup mirror in the book, angled it just so. Yep, there was Chip's face, anxious and pale on the other side of the conference room wall's glass wall. Jonah moved the mirror up and down and side to side, scanning the whole room. He switched the walkie-talkie to send again. "Katherine, tell Chip to stop fiddling with the cell phone," he whispered urgently. "He'll give us away." Seconds later, in the mirror, Chip jerked upright. He put his hands flat on the conference room table on top of the printouts of the survivors and witnesses lists he'd brought from home. He raised an eyebrow at Jonah. Over his shoulder, Jonah gave him the thumbs-up signal. Katherine's giggle sounded in Jonah's ear again. "Remember your theory about this woman actually being Chip's birth mother?" she whispered. "You can cross that one off your list." Jonah started to say, "Why?" But then he remembered he needed to be silent too. Over the walkie-talkie, he heard a staticky version of Chip's voice. "Oh, hello, are you the person who reserved this conference room for 3 o'clock? The one who's willing to talk?" Frantically, Jonah angled the mirror, turning his tax code book almost sideways. There, a woman, walking into the conference room. Oh, a tall, statuesque, well-dressed black woman. Very dark-skinned. Definitely not Chip's birth mother. "Chip Winston?" the woman was saying. "Yes," Chip said cautiously, "and you are—" The woman stopped in the conference room doorway and looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes seemed to meet Jonah's in the mirror. She laughed. "Before we begin, I'll have to ask you to turn that cell phone off," she said, "and tell your friends to turn off the walkie-talkies. I appreciate their ingenuity, but they might as well come on in and listen in person." I don't know what you're talking about," Chip stammered. "You're not a very good liar, are you?" the woman said. "I'll have to remember that. I'm talking about the girl in the magazine section in the purple shirt, and the boy in the tax section reading Your Guide to the IRS upside down." Jonah blushed. He started to turn the book around, then realized that made him look even more guilty. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Katherine standing up, rushing toward the conference room. He waved his arms at her, trying to send a telepathic message. No, go back. Pretend you've got nothing to do with me or Chip. Act normal. Don't give anything away. Katherine ignored him. She reached the door of the conference room and began shaking the woman's hand. Katherine Skidmore, she introduced herself. Nice to meet you. Thanks for letting me join you. Katherine made it sound like they were going to be sitting around eating sugar cookies and drinking lemonade. Come on, Jonah, Katherine said. She's got us figured out. Jonah whirled around. But I don't have to go in there, do I? He muttered through gritted teeth. I can stay out here if I want to, so I can run for help if anything happens. Jonah was surprised to see the woman's dark eyes were sympathetic. You're the one I want guarding the door then, she said, watching out for trouble. You can watch from the outside or watch from the inside. I don't care. She looked around, scanning the rows of bookshelves around them. No one was in sight. I'm Angela DuPre, the woman said, holding her hand out to Jonah. You can call me Angela. Hesitantly, Jonah moved forward to shake her hand. He stepped in through the glass door behind Katherine and Angela and pulled the door shut. But he didn't sit down at the table when the others did. He stayed by the door. Angela nodded respectfully at him, as if she approved of that choice. A little advice, Angela said, a hint of laughter in her voice. The next time you do a stakeout, don't enter the building together. It was Jonah she looked at now. I got here at 2. I've been watching the 3 of you for the past half hour. Jonah's face burned. I guess the walkie-talkies were a stupid idea, he mumbled. Oh, it was creative, Angela said. I would have left you to your spy games if it weren't for the range on those things. I didn't want our conversation broadcast to every trucker passing by on the highway, or others who might want to listen. She no longer sounded amused. Her eyes looked haunted. Katherine was glaring at Angela. Oh, that's right, Katherine said, almost in the same snarly catfight voice she used whenever she was mad at her friends. You're afraid to even talk on the phone. I have my reasons, Angela said softly, and somehow that shut Katherine up. But it's safe to talk now? Chip asked eagerly, leaning forward. You can give us answers? Angela gave another cautious look around, through the glass walls into the library, then through the windows into the parking lot. Jonah realized for the first time that Angela had taken the one seat in the room that backed up to a solid brick wall. Even if Jonah weren't guarding the door, she'd made sure nobody could sneak up on her. You're curious about your adoption, right? Angela said. What makes you think I know anything about it? Quickly, Chip explained about the list of survivors and the list of witnesses, shoving the papers over to her so she could look for herself. See, Jonah's name is on the list of survivors too, Katherine chimed in. Mine isn't. I'm not adopted, but I'm the one who took the pictures. Oh, good for you, braggart, Jonah thought. Angela glanced at him just then, and Jonah could swear she knew what he was thinking. She smiled at him. I can tell you what I witnessed 13 years ago, even though I'm not supposed to discuss it with anyone. You'll probably think I'm crazy anyhow. Chip was leaning so far forward now that Jonah was afraid he might fall out of his chair. You know where I came from? Chip asked. Where we came from? Angela was shaking her head, frowning ruefully. Not where exactly, she said apologetically, but I think I might have a pretty good guess about when. Chapter 18. When? Chip repeated numbly. Jonah was thinking that maybe English wasn't his native language after all. Maybe he'd spent his first few months of life hearing some other language, and maybe that was why he couldn't make Angela's words make sense in his head. Katherine started laughing. Oh, thanks, she said sarcastically. That makes everything clear as mud. She flipped her hair over her shoulder. We already know the when. Chip and Jonah were both adopted 13 years ago. 12 years, 10 months, and 4 days to be exact, Chip said. Angela narrowed her eyes, looking at Katherine. Perhaps you'd like to hear my story before you dismiss it, Angela said. Please, Jonah said, and he was proud of himself that he'd managed to say that much, and he was feeling so jangly and strange. Angela looked down at the table, and it occurred to Jonah that maybe she was nervous too. Nervous, talking to a couple of kids? That didn't make sense either. 13 years ago, Angela began softly, I worked exactly 1 day at SkyTrails Airlines. Katherine opened her mouth, and Jonah could tell she was about to say something snarky and mean, like, wow, did you get fired after 1 day, or were you just too lazy to go back for day 2? Jonah glared at his sister. He pressed his thumb and forefinger together and drew them across his lips, the universal sign for, shut up. He hoped the full force of his glare, plus the gesture, would let her know, if you say one more nasty thing, I will throw you out, and Chip and I won't tell you a single word that Angela says, so you won't know a thing. Katherine coughed. SkyTrails, she said weakly. It's an old airline. Probably none of you have heard of it, because it went out of business 10 years ago, Angela said. It went bankrupt, didn't pay for any of its creditors, but I still get a disability check from SkyTrails every single month. Disability, Jonah thought. That was for people who couldn't work anymore because they were sick or too disabled. Angela looked as if she could run a marathon, even in those funky high heels she was wearing. And anyhow, Jonah had some vague notion that disability checks came from the government, not private businesses. Angela was looking around, from Katherine to Jonah to Chip, as if she expected one of them to ask another question. No one said anything. Angela sighed. "That one day at Skytrails changed my life," she said. "What I saw, well, you won't believe me, and nobody else will back up my story. But I know what I saw. I'm not crazy." Oh, Jonah thought. Can people maybe get disability checks for being crazy too? Angela shrugged. "I can tell by your eyes you're already starting to doubt me," she said, in a voice that was strangely choked. Jonah wondered, why would it matter to Angela whether 3 kids believed her? "But," Angela continued, "I'm going to tell you this anyway. I think I have to." "Okay," Chip said. Angela clasped her hands together on the table, seeming to steel herself for the story ahead. "During my one day as a gate agent at Skytrails, an unidentified plane arrived at the airport," Angela said. "It was an unscheduled landing, completely unexpected. Depending on who you believe, either the radar was out of order briefly while it was landing, or it just appeared out of nowhere." Jonah saw Katherine stiffen. "I was evidently the only person who saw it appear," Angela said, "the only person who was looking." "Did it disappear too?" Katherine asked in a small voice. Angela shot her a surprised look. "I wasn't planning to get to that part until later," Angela said, "but yes." "I saw something like that happen once too," Katherine admitted. "Not a whole plane appearing and disappearing, but a person, a man." "So you know what it's like," Angela said slowly, "knowing exactly what you saw, but thinking it couldn't possibly have happened like that. Second-guessing yourself, having other people make fun of you because you won't say, 'Oh, I must have made a mistake.'" "Exactly," Katherine said, nodding eagerly. Any second now, they'd be throwing themselves into hugs, sobbing onto each other's shoulders, proclaiming, "Nobody understands me but you." "Can we get back to the story?" Chip interrupted. "That plane, was I on it? Was Jonah? Did it crash? Is that why we're listed as survivors? I want to look at records and find out where it came from. Maybe talk to the pilot." Angela snorted. "It didn't crash," she said, "but good luck finding any records. Or the pilot." But, Chip sputtered. Angela's look was sympathetic again. "I'm willing to bet that you two were on that plane," she said. "There were lots of babies. And if I was listed as a witness and you were listed as survivors, that's the only thing I've ever witnessed where government agents got involved like that." "But why were government agents involved?" Jonah asked. "A plane landed, it didn't crash, big deal." Somehow, he could gloss over the whole appearing-disappearing part of the story, just as he'd glossed over it when Katherine was telling about the vanishing man in Mr. Reardon's office. He believed in ignoring unpleasant facts, in hopes that they'd go away. "An unauthorized plane landed," Angela corrected him. "That's supposed to set off an alert for the entire airport. There's a whole protocol to be followed in those situations that I, being new, forgot about. But when I heard the first baby crying—" "Me?" Jonah thought. "Was I crying?" "Wasn't the baby with its parents?" Chip asked. "Or some adult?" Angela looked him straight in the eye. "The plane was full of babies. 36 of them," she said. "But there wasn't a single adult aboard." Chip laughed, a bitter sound in the sudden silence. "What, babies were flying the plane? You expect me to believe that? Goo goo gaga, air traffic control, this is baby plane 1, over," he mocked. "It sounds like something out of a diaper commercial." Angela fixed him with a steely look. The FBI's theory was that there had been a pilot, a co-pilot, a whole flight crew, but they escaped somehow. Even though there were security cameras at the gate, and none of them showed anyone leaving the plane before I stepped on. "So maybe there was a secret door somewhere, out of the camera's view," Jonah said. "Or maybe it was an experimental high-tech plane that worked on autopilot." He was still looking for realistic explanations, but if experimental high-tech autopilot was the best he could do, he was really getting desperate. "You think the pilot and flight crew just vanished into thin air," Katherine said, her voice ringing with confidence. "Possibly," Angela said. "Or—" She stopped. The one word hung in midair, tantalizingly. "Or," Jonah prompted. Angela shook her head. "I'll work up to that one," she said dryly. "Chip will just start laughing at me again." "I'm sorry," Chip said, though he didn't really sound like he meant it. "You're making this all Twilight Zone-ish, but it just seems like, well, what Mr. Reardon told Jonah and Katherine sounds about right. There was some sort of baby smuggling ring. When they were forced to land, maybe the police were shooting them down. Maybe they just ran out of gas or oil or whatever planes use. But anyhow, the people ran away, left the babies behind because they didn't want to get caught. So really, as long as the FBI or INS or whoever looked at the plane, if they looked at, I don't know, the instruction book in the cockpit to see what language it was written in, There should have been lots of clues about where we came from, and surely they have all that in their records, and... You forgot what I said, Angela said in a steely voice. The plane disappeared. Maybe it didn't disappear exactly, Chip said. Maybe they just towed it away and you thought, His voice trailed off because both Katherine and Angela were glaring at him, full force. I told you wouldn't believe me, Angela said, and she sounded so sad that Jonah felt guilty on Chip's behalf. Jonah wasn't sure what to make of Angela's story either, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Shall I continue? Angela asked. Meekly, all three kids nodded. Before I knew what was going on, there were FBI agents there, and police and airport officials and airline officials and all sorts of other officials I couldn't even identify, Angela said. They were treating the whole airplane like a crime scene, a mystery to solve, but, there were all those babies, and when one starts crying, they all start crying, and you could just tell it was driving those official types crazy, so they organized this baby brigade, and we had all these people carrying the babies off the plane. We were supposed to pay close attention to which seat each baby had come from, in case that was important. We didn't have carriers or strollers or anything like that, so we just closed off the entire gate area and lined the babies up on the floor. We were just lucky none of them was old enough to be crawling yet. Jonah had been to the airport a couple of times, once when he was in 3rd grade and his Cub Scout troop had taken a field trip to learn about planes, and once when his family had gone to Disney World and Dad hadn't wanted to drive. Jonah could just imagine the chaos of 36 babies being taken off a plane at once. But surely it would have been chaos. Surely lots of people would have seen. Angela was still talking. The moment we had all the babies off the plane, and all the agents and officials and airline personnel were off the plane too, because we were trying to get the babies sorted out, at that moment, I looked back, and I could see the plane, just like normal, just like I could see the carpet under my feet, or the rubber lining around the door, or my hand in front of my own face. It was there, and then it was gone. There was nothing there except air, and I could see straight out to the runway lights and the satellite dishes and the highway. Even now, 13 years later, Angela's voice was full of wonderment. It was like she was still amazed, still stunned. And once again, you're the only one to see this? Chip asked, making no effort to keep the skepticism out of his voice. Angela turned her head sharply. No, she said. Monique saw the plane disappear. Monique Waters, my boss. But later, when Monique saw how things were going, she denied it all. She was the one who filled out the disability papers, saying I was delusional and prone to hallucinations and unfit to work at SkyTrails. How do you know she saw it disappear? Chip asked. Because she screamed out, holy crap, where'd that plane go? Angela said, grinning slightly. Jonah was trying to absorb all of this. He sort of wanted to believe Angela. He was sure she believed what she was telling them. But it was too incredible. What about the other people? Katherine began. Didn't any of them... It was dark out, Angela said. We were all carrying babies. You tried to take care of 36 infants and still managed to think clearly. I think some of the other people might have seen the plane vanish, but when this one guy, James Reardon, the one we talked to, Katherine interrupted. Angela nodded. He started running around, taking charge, telling people, all right, my agency has the plane towed away now. We'll handle it from here. We'll advise you if we discover anything that's relevant to your department. Thanks for your help. And later, I kind of wondered, maybe some of those people had seen weird things like that before and had decided to pretend they didn't exist to be able to keep their jobs. It was close to Christmas time. They were happy to be sent home. Of course, none of them had seen the plane appear from nowhere and vanish into nothing, both, so they could believe the official story more easily. Nobody went to the news media? Chip asked. Nobody put it out on the internet? Not that the plane vanished even, but just that there was this mysterious bunch of babies? Didn't we make CNN? His voice sounded mocking, but when Jonah glanced his way, Chip's face was deadly serious. Angela shrugged. The internet wasn't the big deal it is today, she said, and we weren't supposed to contact any newspapers or TV stations. James Reardon wanted us all to sign confidentiality statements, but I refused. Is that why you lost your job? Jonah asked. Pretty much, Angela said. Monique told me not to come back until I was ready to sign. I was never ready. I did talk to a newspaper reporter. I did call a TV station. But when everyone else said I was crazy, what good did it do? She held her hands out, a gesture of helplessness. Jonah tried to imagine being like Angela, standing up for the truth. He didn't think he could be so brave. Why did it matter so much to you? Chip asked. I know what I saw, Angela said fiercely. I trust my own eyes. And I wasn't going to lie because I thought it might be important. I thought the babies might be important. I thought we should really investigate, not just pretend nothing ever happened. So you've investigated, haven't you? Katherine said, jumping ahead. Her eyes were glowing, like she found a new hero. That's one way of looking at it, Angela agreed. The more common view would be that I've become a total crackpot, totally obsessed. My own family thinks I'm crazy now because I tell them my phone is tapped, the government's watching me. But, sometimes paranoia is justified. I get paid for doing nothing, even though I've called many times and said I don't deserve disability pay. So I decided to use the money to do research, to study physics. Physics? Katherine repeated. Clearly, this wasn't what she'd expected. Well, yeah, Angela looked down at her hands. Jonah noticed she had her fingers knotted together, like she was suddenly very tense. Look, you're not going to believe me anyhow, so maybe I shouldn't even tell you this part. I've been working on this for 13 years, and it's gotten me nothing but scorn and mockery, and I've gotten no confirmation, no sign that what I believe is true, at least, not since that first day. So maybe I should just pat your heads, tell you to run off and be good little children for your parents, and don't worry about where you came from. Don't be like me, obsessed and paranoid, and we already are, Chip said firmly. It's too late. Speak for yourself, Jonah thought. But he was dying to hear Angela's theory, too. He couldn't walk away now, either. Angela took a deep breath. Okay, then, she said. One thing I saw that nobody else did, though I did report it when I was debriefed before they began talking about confidentiality statements, was an insignia on the plane. By the time everyone else saw the plane, it looked like any other SkyTrails regional jet, but when I first saw it, the plane's door said, Tachyon Travel. Tachyon, Tachyon. You're all too young, probably, to have studied much physics, and anyway, this is theoretical physics. So, what's a tachyon? Katherine asked. She always hated being talked down to, or told she was too young for something. Tachyons are particles that travel faster than the speed of light, Angela said. The speed of light, Jonah thought. What's that got to do with anything? I thought nothing could travel faster than light, Katherine said, acting proud she already knew that. Nobody knows, really, Angela said. She was speaking very carefully now, watching for their reactions. At least, nobody knows yet. The theories are that if anything could go faster than light, all sorts of weird things would happen. Time and space would have a different relationship, aging would be different, and if a plane could travel that fast, it would become a time machine. Everyone stared at her. Chip was already shaking his head. Who would send a bunch of babies in a time machine, he asked scornfully. What would be the point? I don't think anyone sent a bunch of babies in a time machine, Angela said, speaking very precisely. I think a bunch of adults got into a time machine. I think there was an experiment, one of the first attempts at time travel. They didn't understand all the effects, so they didn't realize what would happen when they arrived in our time. She paused, letting that sink in. You mean, Katherine asked. Jonah couldn't tell if she really understood, or if she was just prompting Angela. I mean that Chip and Jonah used to be much older than they are now, Angela said. I think they were changed by traveling through time. I think they, and all the other babies, came from the future. Alright, so that's where we're going to stop for today, but I can't wait to hear what you guys think about that, and I cannot wait to keep reading and see if Jonah and Chip really did come from the future.